Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on facilitation techniques in co-production as part of the Scottish Co-Production Network session for March. So we are going to go through some slides today, as I've said. So I will just pop into the presentation and we'll start there. So a lovely warm welcome to everyone today. Please feel free to use the chat bar. Sam is going to be keeping an eye on the chat bar to see if there are any questions. Do feel free to introduce yourself. Let us know who you are, where you're from. And if there's any questions coming up, we will pick them up as we go through that session. As I've said, in terms of today, we're going to use the chat for questions and we'll gather those at the end. If there's anything really pertinent and urgent, Sam will interject and give me the heads up that that's there. We are going to be sharing the slides and the materials afterwards, and we are recording this session so you can come back and use it as a tool to refer to, or if you're having internet problems or something comes up, that will be there as a resource for you on our website. Just a wee reminder as well, we are currently doing a membership survey for all of our CoPro network members. So if you would like to fill that in, if you haven't already had a chance to, that would be absolutely amazing for us. That will help us shape our next year's work to make sure that we're actually meeting what you, our network, need from us as a team, and we'll work that together. So let's just dip straight into the session today. And a little bit about SCDC. SCDC are the organisation that hosts the Scottish Co-Production Network. SCDC is a small charity. We work across the breadth of Scotland, and we're the lead body for community development. We work to a vision of a strong and fair Scotland where people have the best opportunities possible about inclusive and fair communities and organisations. We work with a range of different community groups and organisations, community development practitioners, folks like yourselves in this session today, with the government and other policymakers, and local partnerships and agencies who want to involve communities in the work that they do. The aims for today's session are so that you can go away from the session today with an increased understanding of what good facilitation practice looks and feels like, and some of those specific skills. So we're going to go into that in the main body of our day today, to really think about exploring ways that you can guide your group discussions towards that collaborative co-pro movement for everyone to be involved in all of those decisions together. And really to give you a bit of an increased insight and confidence into dealing with different group dynamics. And we will touch on some challenging situations there and how you may help that as well. As I said, SCDC hosts the Scottish Co-Production Network, and that's why we're all gathered here today. The Scottish Co-Production Network does support policy and practice across the whole of Scotland, and it really is about that, making things happen with rather than to people. There's lots of resources and materials on the site there that you will be able to go and have a look at if you haven't already done so. The role of the Scottish Co-Production Network, it really is that bit about supporting co-production policy and practice across Scotland. So we work really closely with the Scottish Government and other public bodies, other agencies that want to use and embed co-production in their work. And we really do that coming from the point of learning from all of the people in the network. The network is as strong as our membership is, and we've got a really strong membership there that is always coming back and giving us as a team here lots of challenge, lots of great questions, lots of different things to think about, and also helping us really gather those good practice examples. And on these links, when you get the slides out later, you'll be able to jump on and see those good practice examples. And our session today is going to be focused on facilitation, but really with the co-production guide as our kind of backbone for the session today. A little bit about setting the context for co-production. Co-production isn't new. It's been around for quite a while now. There was lots of talk around about co-production back for the Christie Commission back in 2011. My goodness, it's 15 years on, and we're still having some of the same conversations about that preventative agenda. But I think it's a really key part of the the context and the way of thinking that really embedded co-production for lots of our services. We've also seen things like the Community Empowerment in Scotland Act in 2015 that really starts to think about that. How do we get communities more engaged, more involved, and making the decisions at the lowest possible level in our communities, with people being that are most impacted by decisions are the ones that are there in the heart of those decisions. There's been this real power shift from it being things done to people and moving to that doing with people. So it's really about relationships between services and individuals. And my figures on this one are now a little bit out of date for the number of network members. At our last update, we had over 1,700 network members. So, you know, we've got a really strong network in Scotland of people that are so passionate and care about co-production and want to do it well. So we're really, really lucky in that context in Scotland. As I said, you know, some of the key kind of policy and documents round about that. So I've already mentioned the Community Empowerment Act, the Christie Commission. The way that we talk about community planning and health and social care integration, so much more now, we're really coming down to thinking about how do we get people involved in it, not as service users, but as equal partners. How do we start to hear those voices? How do we become really aware of what that looks and feels like for people that are using the services in our community, and to actually get that lived and living experience voices into making our services work for everybody? Because when we get it right, it doesn't just help the less heard voices, those easier to ignore people, it makes it better for everyone. So there's that real push there. We've got community learning and development regulations and community learning and development plans, which are so much about involving our communities in the things that matter to them locally and making our communities stronger and more vibrant. There's also things in the Children and Young People's Act, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which actually embeds the right for participation as enshrined in law now for our children and young people as well. So there's lots there about, you know, how do we get people involved in the things that matter to them? And there's the National Performance Framework for the Scottish Government, which is under review at the moment and will be slightly changing from the current format that it's in. Christie, that I've said, is fundamentally where a lot of the conversation for co-production came from, really talking about people and individuals and communities being involved in the design and delivery of services, not just coming in at the end and rubber stamping something that's already happened. Services being shaped by the people that use them, the people that know them. Really about that prevention agenda that we, you know, Christie, one of the key messages from Christie is we can't keep doing what we've always done. It's a broken system that way, and we need to think about that preventative agenda. We need to start thinking about how do we move services forward and change that delivery. About performance, so it's about reducing duplication, and I think that's one of the beauties of co-production, when we're all in that room and working together on what makes our places better. We actually have so much more of that collective hive mind. People will know things that other people don't, and that can really reduce that duplication and make our services and systems far more efficient. And it's about partnership. Partnership is the core of everything that I think we do in Scotland. It's such a strength that we have here about thinking about how do we work more closely with our communities, with all those different stakeholders to actually get things going in the right direction for communities and different groups. As I said, our session today is going to be really shaped round about the co-production guide. The co-production guide was co-produced from ideas with the network that started the work back in 2022. So it's taken a little while for us to go through that co-production process and come up with a guide as it stands now. The guide is still evolving. So if you have case studies you would like to share with us, please do get in touch. If you go through the guide and something doesn't make sense to you or isn't quite where you expect to find it, then please use the feedback form on the guide to let us know, and we will listen to that. We'll keep tweaking it and shaping it and making it the guide that works for everybody. So, we've talked a lot so far, and for me, it's always really important that we actually touch back on and say, when we're talking about co-production, are we actually all on the same page? So here's some definitions that we tend to use in our services when we're talking about it. The New Economics Foundation says that co-production is a means of delivering public services in an equal and reciprocal relationship between professionals, people using services, their families, and their neighbours. I like that one because it kind of really does show that the breadth of people that are involved. Our own definition from the Scottish Community Development Centre, co-production is about combining our mutual strengths and capacities so that we can work with one another on an equal basis to achieve positive change. And then Sandy Watson said it's about involving people not only in the rowing and the steering of the boat, but also in actually building it. And I really like that, the picture that it gives of everybody being engaged and involved right from the very early stages. Really important as well to touch on what co-production isn't. So co-production isn't just about a service user involvement in assessing or designing services. It's not just about having somebody on a board or a panel. It's not just about consultation. And it's not just partnership working, but all of these things can combine to be part of a co-production process. So, co-production would never just be the end part of a consultation where we go out and say, this is what we're going to do. Do you agree with us? It would be about getting people involved right from the early stages and going, we're thinking about this. This is our idea. Come and help us shape it. So why are we all here? Why is co-production so important? And I think for me, these two little quotes that are from our co-production explainer video that is on the website, for me, that this sums it up. Co-production goes beyond partnership and participation because it requires people to act together on an equal basis. And that equal part is so, so important. Because we all have skills, whether those are skills through learning or skills and knowledge through experience, lived and living experience there as well. And it means that we can all contribute. So our experiences, our skills and our ideas to make our communities even better. So it's that positive drive behind it that makes co-production so important. It's all about that improvement. It's about continual learning. It's about how do we make things the best that they possibly can be. So into co-production in practice, it's really important that we start co-production by being realistic. We can't promise the moon on a stick. So it's about really thinking about what's there, having those honest conversations with people, what's possible and what isn't. We know there are a number of challenges in our public finances and our community and voluntary sector finances that sometimes we just don't have the resources to do that. And that can be a really difficult but honest conversation to have. And also, the way some of our public bodies are set up, there are things that they have statutory duties to do that can't be changed. So it's about being honest, what is actually on the table in our co-production possibilities. It's about building trust, and that takes time and it takes resources. And often we sometimes jump to the let's go into the service discussions and the what can we improve and what do we need to improve, without actually taking the time to learn about each other, to build that trust, to have that kind of respectful dialogue. And sometimes that can just be, let's actually agree how we're going to work together. Let's set up, a good working agreement. Let's set up the rules for our engagement as we go forward. And it does take time. It's a process, so it's not something that we can jump into quickly. And I think just having that in the back of your mind that, it's that saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. if you want to go well, go together. And I think that's really important in terms of our co-production as well. And for me, even imperfect co-pro absolutely beats no pro. Because if we have people involved, even if we don't get it right, even if it's not perfect, I think having those voices and listening to what people are saying helps us make better decisions. So for me, definitely co-pro over no pro. It's also that part in co-production and practice. I think we use so many of these other co-words. So this is a lovely little illustration from Kay McKercher from the Beyond Sticky Notes book. And I think that's just, it helps us think about which bits are we actually doing here? Because there can be in that co-production center circle there are so many other little bits that we can pull into that relationship as well. And it's okay to only do a part of this if that's all that you have the resource to do well. So you may be going, actually, we can't co-produce the whole of this program because we are funded to deliver a certain program. But you might go, actually, we can do a bit of co-design here so we can get people in to help us shape that. Or you might want to build in that kind of co-evaluation where you go, we're going to have people involved in this project that we're working on. We can't co-produce it from the beginning because we don't know who's going to be involved. But what we can do is make that plan to co-evaluate at the end. And all of that in the kind of bits around the edge there help build capability, build skills in our communities. They help us think about that power sharing. How do we get better at having other people shape and share the services that we're doing? Really thinking about those different participatory means, and I'm going to touch on some of those tools and techniques as we go forward, and really about that bit of prioritising relationships and how do we make that work really well? How do we get our relationships built stronger and more sustainably for all of our communities? So, starting co-production, how do we go about it? For me, it always starts from a position of being curious. And that might be what you already know about co-production, but also what do you already know about the project or the idea that you have. So it's really that part of coming from a point of not knowing all of the answers. Again, our co-pro explainer says we don't know where we're going to end up, but we're going to end up there together. And for me, that's a really strong core for co-production. It's thinking about being really clear on what you might want to change. So thinking about where do we want to end up? Where, and it is that bit about not knowing where we're going to end up, but thinking about what do we need to change? How can we get people involved in this change journey? And thinking about the resources that you might need to get there. Thinking about the people that you need, and that might be, as I've said before, that might be people with lived and living experience, that might be other practitioners, that might be, coming to the team here at the Co-Production Network and going, we could do with a little bit of help and guidance here. This would make so much difference if we just had a little bit of, mentoring support or a little bit of advice and guidance, or even just that reminder that, the guide is there. Be signposted to it. Come to us with questions. That spirit of curiosity and wanting to learn and wanting to improve. Really think about if there are any training, development and learning needs. Through the network, we regularly run ideas clinics where people can come along and present something that my son has a fantastic phrase, has an itchy brain question. So that question that, is in there in the back of your head, is kind of mulling away and is making you think about it. So consider if there's anything there that we can do to help you through the team. Those can be ideas clinics. We do a couple of learning events through the course of the year. We'd love to hear your good stories, your good news stories. So come to us if you've, gone through a process that's worked really well. Come to us and share that with us, and we love sharing that. And also, monitoring and evaluation should be built in from the very earliest phase that you can get there, so that you're actually considering how do we know when this is working? What can we do? How are we going to evaluate? How are we going to monitor? And really think about that right from the very start. And then our reflection and learning process. What do we do next? Where do we go from here? So facilitation, There are a number of techniques that can support facilitation of co-production. It's not a one size fits all, so there will be some of the tools and techniques that I'm going to take you through. Some of them you're going to feel more comfortable with, and others you might go, that's not something I would like to use. But they're just a range of different tools and techniques. Things like the national standards for community engagement. And I've actually just realised I put national framework, so that's my bad. So I apologise for the error in my slides. The national standards for community engagement, and I will correct that before it comes out to you, are a really good framework for helping you start to think about, when we're looking at that planning work with communities and with other people, how do we actually make sure that, we're planning well, that we're really thinking about it, that, we're being inclusive. Our communication is good. We're very clear about what and why it is we're aiming to change things. To think about how we can support people to be engaged in that. How do we overcome those barriers to participation? Thinking about, our planning and how we work together and using the right methods. And absolutely that part about the impact. What difference is it making? That's always the key for me, is for everything. What are we changing, and how do we know we're changing it? So good facilitation is really important. Excuse me while I take a wee sip of water. Good facilitation is so important in the relationships and co-production because it is absolutely fundamental to building trust, getting people to come together, thinking about those ways that we can improve cooperation between public bodies, community organisations, people in our communities, individuals. Just getting that right really makes it a much better process. It can move into, if it needs to, there's facilitation can be about some conflict resolution, but it can also avoid conflict. So if you get things right, you can have those really good guidelines in place from the start that actually help avoid conflict coming up. It gets us into a place of really effective and impactful decision making, where people who are the most affected by the decisions are having their voices not just heard, but really listened to and respected in that process to get to that equal participation and sharing decisions. It absolutely does improve relationships. It does increase trust. When it's done well, we see a real increase in engagement. People are passionate, they come forward and they care. And it can get us into a really innovative and different headspace in the way that we work. Some of the skills, I'm not going to read all of this to you because the slides will come out afterwards. But really, when you're going into this as a facilitator, thinking about your own skill set, what do you take to the table? And that's always about your active listening, that being able to really listen and hear what is being said, to kind of pick up on those emerging themes, to think about building that understanding, being really respectful of everyone, and knowing that when people come to work together in groups, it's being really aware of those different styles and those different characters that people come along with. So every group will have the person that is a dominant voice that speaks a lot, and there will be other people that are less able or less willing to speak in groups. So it's sometimes thinking about how do we make sure that everybody's being heard. As a facilitator, there's that point of neutrality that you kind of park your own thoughts and wishes at the door, and you're there to make that conversation work really well. You need to be quite assertive as a good facilitator. It's about really thinking about how and when you might want to intervene, when do you let conversations go, and when do you actually kind of pull it back and get back to your agenda. And that really good bit of being clear on the purpose and just observing what's happening in the room. And for me, there's some process tips around about a really successful session. And I always find that, coming back to this list, even as somebody that's been involved in community development for for 30 years now, still coming back and doing that good planning for sessions really helps get the best out of every co-productive opportunity that we've got together. So I always come in prepared, and that can be, knowing the space, knowing the venue, being really familiar with the agenda and the time that you have with your participants and everything that's happening. Being aware of the environment and thinking about, if you're having an in-person meeting, what does that venue look like? What are the logistics, time considerations? If you're online, being as accessible as possible. Being very clear about the purpose, being clear about your outcomes. Sometimes that might actually be having your first session together in a co-productive journey to actually start to agree your purpose together at the beginning. Setting expectations, and for me, this is always a really key part to making relationships work well. So get that early in the session, asking people what they want out of the session too, what are their hopes and their concerns, and then to think about, do you want to agree your ground rules for working together? It's always important to try and keep the energy in the room. And I know this is a difficult one for a webinar because I know you're probably sitting there taking notes and it's difficult to do that. But for lots of sessions, it's thinking about, how do we break it up so that it's not just lots of giving information, that people have lots of different ways to shape and get involved. So you can use things like icebreakers, and some people love a good icebreaker, other people cringe at them, but it's sometimes just finding what works for the group that you're with. Thinking about different ways of gathering that voice from people. And that can be, different activities like doing photo walks, going out with people and actually saying, show me what it feels like for you when you come into our building or when you're in this service, and getting people to just take some pictures and be ready to talk about it. And also then to have good times where you can actually summarize and reflect. And that can be, group discussions, that may be some quiet reflective time where you might ask people just to use, a couple of post-it notes and pop down their thoughts there. So it doesn't always have to be kind of asking people to speak up in a group. Participation, communication styles will vary among different people. So it's to try and find a balance there so that there's opportunities for everyone to be included and heard and listened to. And sometimes that might actually be if somebody's really shy for a start, it might be saying, if you don't want to speak in the meeting, I can talk to you after the meeting. We can set up a time when it's just us. So there's lots of different ways that you can allow that to happen. And really thinking about how do you make sure that the more vocal people don't dominate the conversations and activities. And that can just be, having a little list of things that you can actually interject if somebody is hogging the airspace. And that can be something really pleasant, a really pleasant little way of saying, I'm really interested in that, but we don't have time to discuss that today. So can we park that and come back to it? Or, let's talk about that at our next meeting. Let's put that onto our agenda. So there are ways that you can actually let people feel that they've had that space to say what's important to them, to be listened to, and to know that it's not just being ignored. So we've actually we can send out with the slides, we've got a little kind of A4 sheet that's got some suggestions there on how to politely move forward with dominant voices in a conversation. So we'll make sure that resource comes out to you as well. Your facilitation style, people do as a facilitator, as a kind of, in that space, you will have a way of working that is comfortable for you. And you may find that needs to vary for different groups. So it can sometimes be quite a formal facilitation role where you have a fixed agenda to get through. And other times it's more about guiding the conversation, being that kind of person that just keeps it moving in the right direction, make sure that everybody's having a chance to come in, and just being that linchpin that keeps everybody together. There's lots about thinking about your own emotional state when you come in to facilitate is really important. And sometimes it's giving yourself that space to plan and prep. And if you know you're going into what might be a difficult conversation, thinking about that really important part of your self-care. How am I going into this as the best possible me? And also, how do I come out of it at the other end without having all of that weight on my shoulders? Where's your kind of space for your debrief afterwards as well? So thinking about that self-care is really important as a facilitator. There's also the kind of practical things there about, as a good facilitator, people will remember how you show up. Do you sound excited about your topic? Do you sound like you are really engaged and involved and want to hear from people? Or are you, and we all have sessions that don't go perfectly in our lives. Co-pro isn't a perfect process. But if you can come into a room feeling excited about what you're doing, feeling interested, that shows in our presence and how we show up. So that's a really important part of facilitating co-production. This is the bit that we're going to dig into a little bit deeper here as well. So there are a wide range of participatory activities that you can use within those conversations. Some people will feel very comfortable with them, and others people might feel less comfortable. So there's some of these different activities that can be used. So there's visioning exercises where you get people flip charts and sticky notes and pens. I think that's the kind of kit for a community development practitioner. For years, I think I've had a pack of Sharpies, a flip chart, and some post-it notes in the boot of my car that comes with me wherever I go. So there's that bit about thinking about those tools that we can use. And visioning exercises can just be, really simple questions about where do we want to go? What do we want to change? That really get into that kind of collaborative definition setting part where we're thinking about what's our common goal? Where are we going together? It's things like asset mapping, where you can actually sit down, and that can be physical, where you might look at a map of a community, where you go, actually, this is where the community centre is, this is where our library is, this is our hospital, this is our GP clinic. And you can actually think about what do we already have? And you can really start to unpick that and go, these are our resources as a community, but where are our barriers for accessing them? What can we change? How do we actually get to the right spaces and the right places for people? And using, that can be done, I say, on a physical map. That might be about getting people to build a Lego version of their town or their place. And you can be really creative with this. Back a number of years ago, there were things like the planning for real exercises where people would often build a model of their place. Or you can do it online where you use things like, a Google map. So there's lots of different tools and techniques that can be used for that asset mapping. Moving through World Cafe. I particularly like a World Cafe. This is one of my comfort places as a facilitator. I just think, having the ability for people to move around those conversations and have, different questions set up on different stations allows people to dip in and out, but also to kind of do that building, so that iterative process where people can build on an idea that's already there, or sometimes even kind of not quite throw out the idea, but rip it up and start again and go, actually, that's given me a thought that allows me to do this. So I love a good World Cafe. And again, it allows people to get up and move. So sometimes when we're in meetings, that ability to get up and stretch your legs, to do something, to actually physically move helps sometimes shift those internal thoughts and mindsets as well. Small group deliberative spaces, so breakouts, can be absolutely fabulous. It allows that deeper conversation. It also allows some of those quieter participants who may not feel comfortable in a huge room to actually come forward and get involved. And that can be, breakouts work really well, both online and in person. For the online ones, you can use tools like Padlets that allow people to have that kind of shared space to gather their thoughts that everybody can see. And again, that's a really good way of using Padlets and tools like Mentimeter take away the power from the person that's holding the pen. Because there's a lot about the person that writes it down will put their own lens on what they are writing, and giving people those different tools where it's actually their words is so powerful. You can move into using things like prioritization techniques. I tried to merge those two words together there, sorry. So things like dot voting, where you just give people a sticky dot and go, pop your dot on this line. And it might be, something as simple as, using a line at the start of a training session going, how confident do you feel about co-production? Put your dot on the line. And then at the end of the session, you can also give them another one and say, has your dot changed from earlier? So pop your second dot on the same line, and you can do that kind of learning bit there. You can also use it, things we've seen a lot in our communities round about participatory budgeting, where people then get to vote, which is a fabulous way of seeing what matters to communities and getting lots more people engaged and involved where those priorities are. And then that gives you that real drive to say this is a community-led decision and this isn't just about the small group, that's about that wider engagement. Action planning workshops. These are much more structured sessions where you might look to define who's going to do what and by when, and that's really where you're digging into what are those actionable tasks. Good action planning workshops will have people at all levels of that conversation there, but ideally the people that will be able to make the decision. So that might be for if you're thinking about, if you're working about a service design and service delivery process, that might actually be the head of that service that can come and go, yeah, I'm listening to that. This is what we can do here. We couldn't do that because of this, but these are the bits that we can do. So being able to get that really actionable tasks into solid action. And really the last one here is about storytelling and lived and living experience sharing. This is one I would always urge a little bit of caution on. We're much better in terms of practice than where we were 20 years ago round about this, with much more kind of trauma informed and careful use of that lived and living experience sharing. It's just making sure that there are good supports in place round about the people that are coming forward to share that we're not, making them tell something that's really difficult and really personal without thinking about how do we support them through this? What's the purpose of the storytelling? What's the purpose of them sharing? And how do we actually make sure that they feel that it's valuable for them as well as the wider group? So those are some of the tools and techniques. Good facilitation is also about watching behaviour in the room, and that can be where you reinforce and kind of support those good behaviours, and kind of positive role modelling there as well. There's also the place where you might find yourself having to challenge if there are negative statements there, and that can be quite a difficult place to be as a facilitator, and that you can do that, in ways that you're, do kind of gentle correction in a public meeting where you might, kind of hold a little bit of a challenge up to somebody and go, I'm hearing what you're saying there. Can you explain why you feel that way? Or it may be if it's, if it's veering into something more negative, you might actually go, actually, that's not acceptable. We are not going to accept that kind of language, that kind of behaviour. I'm asking you to stop doing that. And if you do it again, I'm afraid we're going to ask you to leave. But you'll know yourself that those are kind of a spectrum of how you get people through that relationship. There's also, the kind of hints and tips here. You can move the focus away from a person, by, acknowledging their issue and thinking about, how do you bring other voices in? So if somebody's had an awful lot of time, it might just be saying, that's great, Jim. I've heard what you're saying there. I'm really keen that we take in Margaret and hear Margaret's point of view here. And there's just nice ways that you can do that. Or you might just open it up to the room and go, we've heard from Jim there. Who else would, what does that make you think and feel? So there are ways that you can bring in those different voices. Sometimes you can jump to a wee coffee or comfort break and just kind of put a definite stop to what's happening. And that might be where you would have a quiet word with somebody and go, actually, this is making people in the room feel really uncomfortable. This isn't going to be, we're not going to come back to this when we come back together. And that just sometimes that break is enough to do that reset through a session. You might want to change the activity, or you might use it as a time to actually say, that's great. We seem to be coming to the end of our conversation here. We're going to move on to the next agenda item. And you can, there's ways that you can reflect statements back to them. So thinking about, it never works. Tell me why it never works. Show me from your experience why it never works. And just really kind of dig into some of those sentiments. And you can also then widen it out and ask the group for other views as you go through the conversation too. We're kind of moving through, so through the guide, so we're kind of thinking about embedding co-production as well. And a good, well-facilitated co-production process leads to it being embedded naturally. It's a really principled way of working. It's a very values-based way of working, where it's about everybody has skills to come forward and bring into that conversation. Everybody has their own lived and living experience. Everyone has skills by learning and by living. And I think that's a really important place about when we're thinking about co-production, that we value that vast range of skills. It absolutely does improve cooperation. We've had some lovely sessions and some lovely projects in Scotland where you actually see somebody trying co-production in one part of a project or one little piece of their work actually just makes everything work better. It can lead to better outcomes. It's a really good way to hear those easy to overlook voices and actually get to the people that have really great insights into the way our services work and actually get them at the heart of the services designed with people and by people. Co-production's not easy. It does take time, and I think it would be remiss of us to have a webinar and present it as shiny and happy and glowy all the time. It is difficult. It does take time. It needs resources. And we know that for some places, it might not be your priority. So it's okay not to have to co-produce everything. We're not in a position where we can co-produce everything. And sometimes it just might not be your priority. That trust that takes so much time to build up can really easily be lost. So for me, there's things in co-production about those big grown-up conversations where we go, this isn't possible and this is why it isn't possible. It's those tough conversations, but also about going back to people and saying, you remember that conversation we had, that process? This is what's changing because of it, and keeping people really up to date and that good feedback loops. And also being really respectful of people's time. People may have other more pressing demands. We know folks in our communities are having a really rough time for lots of people. We're seeing so many challenges on so many different levels for people, the cost of living crisis, all of the things that come with that. We're seeing, a lot of volunteers in our community are aging volunteers. So there's all those challenges. And also, people have lives outside the work that we want them to get involved in as well. So there's that bit about being aware of the people's demands on their time. For me, I'm a bit of a monitoring and evaluation geek. This is one of my happy places. So for me, it's about thinking about right from the start of facilitating any co-production conversation. Are we embedding our evaluation right from the beginning? Thinking about how do we know what good looks and feels like? And really thinking about that benefit of evaluation helps us improve the processes and the outcomes for communities and individuals and agencies. It helps us really think about our own practice and our own use of resources. And it really helps us think about where else can we do this? How else can we use this in our work? really thinking about gathering that evidence. It's so much easier if we can gather the evidence as we go rather than trying to go back and find the evidence afterwards. It's also thinking about what's our evidence? Are we doing this from a data-driven point of view? Are we using some of the more qualitative story-based parts of our evaluation as well? How do we actually make sure that this is balanced and actually takes in all of those different voices? For me, it's essential to do that, what worked and why, but also the what didn't work, and really dig into the learning there. We've just got a couple more slides to go together. You'll be glad to know that we're nearly at the end of our session. So for me, key steps to a good evaluation is thinking about those outcomes and indicators very early on. So what's the purpose? You know, how do we know what good looks like? How do we track those changes? And also, if there's something unintended occurs, how do we track that? And one of the most beautiful unintended consequences for me was actually a few years ago through a participatory budgeting process. And one of the unintended outcomes of it was actually about communities learning what's already happening. So people put forward their projects, obviously, to go into the vote to get the money for their project. But it actually created this wider network of people that were going, oh, I didn't know there was a men's shed there. Oh, I didn't know about that knit and natter group that was at the library. And it was really that bit about those unintended consequences that by these groups coming forward, they actually then made networks. And also one of the lovely unintended consequences from that one of the groups that was sadly unsuccessful, one of the other groups that had come forward went, you didn't get the money for that, but we can do that for you. We can build, it was a changing station for a mums and toddlers group. They didn't come through in the vote, but the men's shed went, you know what, we'll build that for you. And what we'll do, rather than you just having to buy an off-the-shelf version, which is what they wanted to do, they got this fantastic bespoke version. So it's sometimes thinking about capturing those unintended consequences. Collecting our evidence. How do we know? What does it look like and feel like? How do we get people's thoughts and opinions? And that can be things like group discussions, questionnaires, surveys, interviews, focus groups, all these bits that we can use for collecting the evidence. It's about that really important part of analysing it and thinking about where are the common themes? What are we learning? How have we gathered this evidence? And really, what difference is it going to make? And then that final bit about acting on it. If we're going to do it again, what are we going to change? And for me, that's a really key part of this kind of going round that cycle. How do we act on it? How do we change it? And how do we get better? And you'll be really glad to know we are now at the end of the presentation. So you have my little curious owl. And if Sam has any questions in the chat.
Yeah, there's been some really good discussion and sharing ideas and questions.
Perfect.
There's a question, or I guess a point around from Theo, Karen, and Emmanuel, a little thread going on there about the importance of distinguishing between a story and people's experience, but also the insights of that story, especially in the context of lived experience, almost creating a safe space for lived experience, as opposed to people feeling exposed or kind of put out there, I suppose, with their ideas. So I wonder if that's something maybe to talk on. And there's a couple more questions as well after that.
Absolutely. So in terms of people's stories, I absolutely agree. It's very important that we protect people's safety in that space. There are some fantastic resources. A couple of years ago, SCDC and the Poverty Alliance worked together on a fantastic community research project called Knowledge is Power. And we'll send you the link to these resources out afterwards. And it has a lovely kind of 2 or 3 pages on story dialogue, which is one of the techniques for that telling of stories. And it's got some lovely hints and techniques in there about how to make sure people are safe and their well-being is protected. For some of that, it can also be appropriate to use kind of a little vignette, a little kind of made up story. So it doesn't always have to be somebody telling their personal information. It may be, that you use your knowledge of that situation and you actually build a case study story. So it doesn't have to be somebody sitting and telling something that's hugely personal and difficult for them. You can use loads of different techniques there. So as I say that the knowledge is power resource will take you through some of the lovely ways to keep people safe. It's also about making sure if you do have somebody telling their story, if they've agreed to do that, that you build in time with them afterwards for a debrief session. And that might be something, where you just say to them at the end of the session, let's go and get a coffee together. We'll sit down. I want to unpack how that felt for you. Are you okay? And making sure that somebody's going back out in a psychologically safe and happy way, that they're not then feeling I overshared there or I got that wrong. So you can have lovely little tools and techniques there. But I say that the knowledge is power resource is really good for that one.
There was a question, was two questions, one from Bruce around how to go in a little bit more detail around how to deal with people who might be dominating a conversation. And I'm just going to combine that with a question from Alison just in the chat there as well about encouraging people to think outside the box a bit more in discussion. So
Yeah.
maybe those two questions.
Dominating voices are always going to happen. I say we do have a little handout that we'll send out to you with the information from today as well. It's sometimes just thinking about those kind of polite shut down conversation pieces. So that might be, that's fabulous, Jim. I've heard what you're saying. I'm really keen that you're so passionate about that. But we've got a limited time together today. So can we move on? Or simple things like having a parking space, whether that's, in an online forum where you might just go your kind of anything else space, or it might just be a picture on the wall where you go, this is our parking space. This is where we're going to put all the stuff that we don't have time to get to today, but we will pick it up. There's other ways to kind of move conversations on. And it might just be saying, I'm picking on Jim because Jim's just the first name that came to my head today. So hopefully there's nobody called Jim in the room that is then feeling I'm somehow, picking on them. But it might just be saying, oh, Jim, that's fantastic. But I'd really like to hear from Margaret because Margaret hasn't had a chance to come in. Or I can see that Betty's really keen to come into this conversation, Jim. So can we give way? So there's lovely things there. There's also kind of other techniques that you can use. So there's a technique called a fishbowl, where there's actually the people that are having the main conversation, and then there are other people that can come and actually tap people out. So there's lots of information about this again on the site for you to go and have a look at, but that actually then gives people the permission to kind of physically get somebody moved out of a conversation circle as somebody else moves on to monitor that, to get new voices in. So there's tools and techniques that you can use round about that. In terms of thinking outside the box, I think that's always a really challenging one. And sometimes the way I get people to think a little bit outside the box is turning the question round and going, how can we get this really, really wrong? What would the worst case scenario be? Let's plan something that's going to be awful. And then using that as your way to turn it round and going, right, these are the challenges that you gave me here. So how can we make it that, the most awful thing would be sitting in a webinar? How can we change that round and how can we make that a better and different experience? And it's getting people to then think about that. It can also be things where, as a facilitator, you may have some challenge questions to go, you know, how can we make this different? How can you make it better? Or the what if question. What if we did it differently? What if we stopped funding this and we're able to do something else instead? So sometimes thinking about those questions, and also lots of tools and techniques like the World Cafes. Do you get people to think a little bit differently, and just get them to do that kind of deeper thinking?
There's a question, it was actually quite early on in the chat. It's quite specific, but an interesting one around from Julie about involving guardians as well as the adults that they support in a co-production process. And I don't know if there's any kind of thoughts on that. And then there's one more question from Amy, which we've probably just got enough time for, which I'll come back in a second.
I think absolutely involve guardians if you're working with adults or with children. Um, they're part of that stakeholder makeup for your conversation. Um, it can sometimes you might sometimes want to have separate sessions that think about, what are the needs of this group and how do I make sure that people have the space and the safety to talk. Particularly if we're talking a co-production process I was involved in was round about adults with quite profound learning difficulties. But we wanted a space for their guardians and loved ones to have that conversation too. And we actually took the decision that those would be separate conversations so that the kind of guardians and loved ones could air some of their challenges without then feeling that they were somehow being negative about that experience. They didn't want the people that they loved to hear some of that negative stuff. So it's sometimes thinking about we don't have to have all of the participants in one group altogether. We might have separate conversations that are still part of our co-production journey together. And then you, as the facilitator, would then think about, so where are these common themes and how can we take that forward in respectful ways of everybody's time and knowledge.
Thanks. I think that was actually one of the questions that Julie kind of followed up with as well in terms of separate or sessions together. So that's helpful. We've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to just put one more question in. Is around co-production in the context of different communication styles or neurodivergence. I don't know if there's any kind of last thoughts before we finish up there.
Yeah, I suppose that's when you think about your making your methods fit for purpose. And we know that, coming together in a big group setting doesn't always work for people that may be neurodivergent or that are shy or that have, any kind of difference that they see themselves as being different. Co-production doesn't always have to be done in groups. And for some people, they can be part of that co-production conversation on a one-to-one basis with you if that's what works for them. So it's really thinking about that when we go back to the national standards for community engagement. Are our methods fit for purpose for the people that we are working with? So don't be afraid. Don't always think that co-production has to be everybody in the room all together, all really excited on it all at once. It can be those one-to-one conversations that you can then use to ensure those voices are heard through the process.